Hard in Hightown, Chapter 1 through by Vir Dirthara. Chapter 1. They say coin never sleeps, but anyone who's walked the patrol of Hightown Market at midnight might disagree. The pickpockets and confidence men head to the taverns at dusk, the dwarven businessmen and nobles go back to their tiny palaces to fret over the ways they got cheated, and the market falls silent. Don Brennikovic knew every angle of the market with his eyes closed. 20 years of patrols had etched into him so that he walked that beat even in his dreams. The recruit, Jevlin, was another story. The ring of steel striking stone told Donnan that the kid had stumbled into a column again. His new armor would be full of dents by sunrise. Torches would make this easier. The sound of Jevlin hauling himself off the pavement was like a tinker's cart crashing. Torches make you night blind. You'll adjust. Donnan crossed the square to help the kid to his feet. A breeze scurried across the plaza, sending the banners and pennants shivering and carrying an old familiar scent. Donnan stopped in his tracks. Something's wrong. His voice was low, warning. He peered into the dark up at the mezzanine just above them. Follow me. Be ready for trouble. The two guards climbed the dark stairs and there, in a puddle of shadow, found the body. Gold-trimmed satin glittered through the blood. Get the captain, Donnan sighed. We've got a dead magistrate. Chapter 2. Magistrate Dunwald's butler had the air of a man who had never risen before dawn in his life. He stared down his nose at Don Brennikovic and his partner Jevlin, as if he were on some lofty balcony above them instead of standing in the parlor in his dressing gown. The magistrate is indisposed. This can wait until a reasonable hour. He gestured for the guards to see themselves out. The magistrate is dead, Donnan corrected him. Wake the household. As the butler left, Jevlin shifted uneasily in his new armor. Shouldn't the captain be here? You want to go back to the barracks? Be my guest, Donnan said with a shrug, only half listening as he studied the collection displayed in the room. A dozen ancient swords lay nested in display cases protected from dust and prying fingers. He moved to lift the lid of the nearest one. Jevlin started to protest, but then the doors opened. She had eyes the color of topaz and dark hair that fell across her brow like sword strokes. She strolled into the parlor with such dignified elegance that Donnan didn't realize for several minutes that she was clad in a housecoat and not a ball gown. You have news about my husband? What's Seamus done this time? Forget to pay his bill at the Rose? She seated herself and indicated the guards to do the same. Donnan nodded at the recruit to speak up. Jevlin started. No, Lady Dunwald, actually... She interrupted him with a wave. Marielle, please. Lady Marielle, your husband has been murdered. Donnan took over for the flustered recruit. When did you last see him? Marielle started at him, her jewel-colored eyes wide and her voice cracked on. Murdered? Seamus? But a heartbeat, maybe two, passed, and she again became the perfect picture of noble grace. I saw him at dinner, she answered in a tone anyone might use to comment on the weather. He left before dusk. He said he was going to play Wicked Grace with the Comte de Favre. Do you know of anyone who might have wanted him dead? Jevlin asked softly. People want magistrate deads on principle. She gave a wry smile, but her voice grew pained. Criminals, political rivals, even people in his district who disagree with him. She drifted off, lost in thought, and then turned to Donnan, eyes blazing. A week ago a letter came. Vague threats. I thought it was nothing, but it upset Seamus. Who sent it? Donnan asked. It wasn't signed, but the seal was 6 crossed swords. Chapter 3. For the second time in what was becoming a very long night, Don Brennikovic and his partner Jevlin found themselves knocking on a nobleman's door. It was still hours before dawn, the sky turning gray around the edges. The steel of Donnan's gauntlets clanged against the door. Once. Twice. No answer. He sighed, looking up at the dark windows of the mansion. He was getting too old for this shit. Maybe he's out, Jevlin offered. The recruit was nervous. In the guard a week and barely able to walk through Hightown, too green for a murder case. He's hiding. Look up. Donnan pointed. He shuttered all the windows. There hasn't been a storm in months. He pounded on the door again, louder. We should get the captain. Jevlin shifted and squirmed under his heavy shoulder plates. Donnan had forgotten how badly new guard armor fit. He started to tell the kid where to get adjusted, and the door swung open. Come inside, quickly! A man rushed them inside and through the house. Every room was dark. No moonlight made it through the shuttered windows. No candles flickered. Their way was lit only by a hooded lantern in the hands of their host. He stopped once they had reached a windowless inside room, where he closed and bolted the door behind him. "Comte de Farve," Donnan guessed. The man nodded. In the dim lantern light, Donnan could see that he was dressed in a gaudy brocade doublet, but had thrown a chainmail shirt over it. He wore the helmet from an obviously ceremonial armor set, slightly askew on his head. "I know why you're here," the Comte whispered. "Dunwald." Donnan's voice was flat. "Did you kill him, your lordship?" "This is bigger than a murder," the Comte hissed, his eyes flicking to the door. "Dunwald drew the attention of greater powers. When dragons do battle, guardsmen, mortal men can only take cover. Drop the case. Don't draw their gaze." Chapter 4. Don Brennikovic didn't stand on ceremony. He strode through the barracks and slammed open the door to the captain's office without so much as a nod to the guards he passed. Just barely dawn, and already Captain Hendalen was buried behind a mountain of paperwork taller than the Vim marks. All Donna could see of the captain was her fiery hair and an angry gaze that had stopped more than one pickpocket mid-grift. "Captain, I need a warrant for the Comte de Farve." Even as the words left his lips, Donna knew they were a mistake. The captain rose to her feet. "Brennikovic?" The way she spoke his name was like a portcullis slamming shut. "Where is my report on the Hightown market body?" It was the kind of question you might ask a truant child, the kind where you already knew the answer and just wanted to see someone squirm in guilt. "I'll file it after." "You'll file it now, guardsman." She stepped out from behind the desk. "We follow procedure in my barracks. A magistrate was dead, murdered on my watch, Captain." Donnan's voice was heated. He could never keep his temper in her presence. "I'm not letting the killer get away." "You left the scene without a thorough search of the market?" Hendalen began pacing, her voice like cold steel. "You harassed a magistrate's widow, and you practically broke down a comp's door." She turned to glare at him. "All before dawn. If you want a warrant, you damn well better have hard evidence to justify it." "I know that de Farve isn't telling us everything," Donnan insisted. "Let me bring him in and—" "Forget it." She crossed back to her chair. "You've got nothing. You're not arresting a man on a feeling, Brennikovic." "Captain!" he protested. From behind her paperwork, the captain waved for him to be silent. "You are 2 weeks from retirement, guardsman. You want to stay in the ranks long enough to get pension? You follow procedure. Find me evidence and quit wasting my time. Dismissed." Chapter 5. Drevlin was waiting outside the captain's office when Don Brennikovic slunk out, defeated. "We're not getting a warrant, are we?" Drevlin looked almost relieved. "No." Donnan met his partner's eyes. The kid was barely 20 and looked like he walked straight to the Kirkwall barracks from somebody's potato farm. Taller and broader than the other guards, Drevlin slouched as if he didn't know how to fit into his own limbs, as if he thought he should be smaller. Hunched over in his brand-new, too large armor, he looked like a child playing at being a guard. He was too green for a murder investigation. "Maybe it's for the best," Drevlin said, almost speaking Donnan's thought out loud. "You're on your way out of the guard, and I'm—" He trailed off, then sighed. "Questioning nobles in the middle of the night wasn't covered in training." Donnan glared at the kid. "I'm a city guard, and so are you, recruit. Nobody gets away with murder while we're on duty." Drevlin stood a little straighter. "What do we do then?" "The captain wants proof." Donnan smiled. "We bring her proof." Chapter 6. The estates of Hightown fall into 3 types. The dwarven palaces and their enclave, huddled around their counterfeit paragon statues for shelter against the onslaught of human ideas that surround them. The foreign quarter, where the wealthiest Orlesian and Antivan merchants stay during their twice-yearly visits to criticize the ship captains and shop clerks and accountants in their employ. And the noble mansions, where families who can trace their lineage back to Orlesian conquerors and Tevinger landlords perch to look down on the rabble of ordinary folk scurrying at their feet. But whoever they belong to, all of Hightown estates have 2 things in common. A showy front entrance, used when the occupants want to be seen, and a hidden back way when they don't. The servant's door at the Comte de Farve's mansion was in an alley hidden by overgrown topiaries. Don Brennikovic picked the lock while his partner, Drevlin, kept an uneasy lookout. They had left their armor in the barracks, but even in civilian clothes, the recruit managed to look like he was wearing an older brother's hand-me-downs. "I don't think this is what the captain meant when she said to get evidence," he muttered. The lock clicked, and Donnan gently pushed it open. Only a few slivers of light slid through the shuttered windows. Silence hung in the air like a cheap tapestry. Donnan and Jevlin crept through the dark rooms, alert for any sign of servants, but nothing broke the eerie quiet except their footsteps. In fact, there was no sign of anyone had been in the house at all until they found the room whose door had been torn from its hinges. Inside, the Comte lay in a pool of blood, one hand clutching a loaded crossbow, a dagger hilt protruding from his back. Chapter 7. Don and Brenikovic searched Comte de Far's office. The Comte lay dead, murdered while armed and barricaded inside his own home. The servants' rooms were all empty, and from the pulled-out drawers and abandoned trunks, they had been sent away in a hurry. The Comte had clearly expected trouble, and trouble had come to call. The Comte kept all of his letters. Decades of correspondence sorted by, apparently, kingdom of origin filled his writing desk. Donnan rummaged through them, looking for darker ink, fresher pages, anything that might indicate that it was recent. And then came the shattering sound of someone kicking in the front door. "Hey, my lord Fancy Pants, get your ass down here!" Jevlin and Donnan ran for the foyer. A woman stood over the splintered door, her eyes glittering brighter than the daggers in her hands. "You there," she snapped at the guardsman. "Where's the Comte full of it? We need to have some words. One of them will be coin, and the other will be now." "Kirkwall Guard," Donnan barked back at her. "This is a crime scene. Identify yourself." "Guards, are you?" She smirked, squinting up into the dark towards him. "No suits of armor outside. Man poking around a noble's house in the dark. This does look like a crime scene." Donnan didn't flinch. "Your name?" "Belladonna. Captain Belladonna of the Dragon's Jewels." She executed a florid bow that somehow managed to be insulting. "Where's the damned Comte?" "He's dead," Donnan said, watching her reaction. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" She cracked a wry smile. "Trust me, sweet thing. If I were going to kill him, I'd have waited until he paid me first." "What was your business with the Comte?" Jevlin spoke up, startling Donnan. He'd almost forgotten his partner was there. "Cargo transport," she glowered at the recruit. "He hired me to deliver some antiques, and I've been sitting at anchor for a fortnight without being paid." She peered up into the dark balconies overhanging the foyer and shouted, "Anybody here? You want this rubbish? Come to the docks tonight and pay me 50 sovereigns for it. Otherwise, I'm dumping it in the sea." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away. Chapter 8. Don and Brenikovic left his partner Jevlin at the barracks. The crew was even more jittery after their run-in with Captain Belladonna, and although Donnan himself was starting to feel his limbs weighed down and aching after such a long shift, he finally had the scent of something in the case. He wouldn't let it get away. The city of Kirkwall has a legacy of collectors. It was built in ancient times by Tevinters who collected suffering as if it were rare coins, and they passed on their obsession to future generations. On any street from Darktown to the Viscount's Keep, you can always find someone who'll always buy tapestries, or who has every known spoon made in Navarra, or someone who hoards odd bits and scraps of historical knowledge like it's their grandmother's crockery. Which is how he found himself knocking on a brightly painted door in the alienage. "Oh, guardsman, what a nice surprise! Nobody's been mugged, have they?" The elf beamed up at him. She had green eyes so wide they barely fit in her face, and she seemed to be made of nothing but elbows and knees. "No muggings today, Maisie." Donnan had to duck his head slightly to get through the door. "I have something you might be interested in." He handed her the letter the magistrate's wife had given him the night before. "Well, this doesn't look very interesting at all." Maisie frowned, disappointed. "What you have claimed belongs to greater powers. You will answer to us." That's a lot of rubbish. "Not that. Look at the back." She flipped the letter over and cooed as if she found a lost puppy. "Oh, just look at you. You're just perfect." "Maisie." Donnan spoke in a loud, firm voice, trying to remind her he was still in the room. "Whose seal is that?" "Oh, it's the executor's, of course." Maisie peered excitedly at the wax seal, holding it up to the window for better light. "I should have guessed it from the silly great powers nonsense. There's only been one example, on the letter claiming responsibility for the assassination of Queen Majoral in 599. And this one is so much better. Just look at that imprint." "Any idea how I'd contact these executors?" Donnan asked. "Oh, they're not real, of course. Everyone knows that." Chapter 9. Donnan Brenikovic was running out of leaves to chase. He had only 2 weeks until retirement, just 2 weeks to find the man who'd murdered a magistrate and a Hightown nobleman, if Captain Hendellan didn't kick him out of the ranks first. The dock stank of piss and rotting fish, as foul as the men and women who worked there. But that was where Donnan had to go to find the raider captain Belladonna, who had broken into the Comte de Favre's home. The Dragon's Jewels was a big boat. She liked big boats. The pointy bits towered majestically over the water. That roundish wooden part seemed like it could crush an armada beneath its... wood? It was the greatest boat in the history of boats. But even from the dock, Donnan knew something was wrong. He ran up the gangplank to find a dead sailor on the deck and a blood trail leading down into the hold. Donnan drew his sword and followed. His eyes still hadn't adjusted to the dimness of the lower decks when he tripped over another dead sailor, stabbed in the gut and left where he'd fallen. The body was still warm. The ship creaked with every swell of the waves. Donnan held his breath and crept deeper into the hold. He barely deflected the blade in time. Steel rang against steel. Donnan parried a second blow, still half blind in the low light. The third swing got past his guard and left a wicked slash on his forearm. "Nobody attacks my crew, you fleeting pile of dog shit," the attacker swore, and Donnan recognized her voice. "Hold! Kirkwall City Guard!" he shouted, barely bringing his blade up in time. "You again?" Donnan's eyes finally began to adjust, and he could make out Captain Belladonna. She was clutching her ribs with her right hand, a dagger in her left, and was covered in enough blood Donnan was sure wasn't all hers. She glowered at him. "Could have used a guard not 5 minutes ago. Useless as ever." She grudgingly lowered her weapon. Donnan sheathed his sword. "Who did this?" "Don't know. Didn't care to ask," she sniffed. "Bastard killed 2 of my men before I cut off his hand, and he bolted." She waved indifferently towards the rear of the hold. "It's over there, somewhere." "Did he take the comp shipment?" Donnan asked. "No. If that's what this is about, you can have it." She limped over to a trunk and removed a bundle of cloth tied with twine. She threw it at Donnan's feet. "Good riddance." Chapter 10. Donnan Brennakovic had been pursuing the killer of Magistrate Dunwald without food or rest, and so far all he had was the seal of an imaginary group, a wounded arm, and a package that contained a rusted Tevinter short sword. He was past exhaustion, and every breath made his head throb like he had too much to drink. He was getting too old for this shit. He couldn't go to the barracks with a knife wound he picked up off duty. If the captain caught him, and she would, he'd be thrown out of the guard for sure. That left one option. The Chantry Clinic turned no one away, but it usually didn't have to. The presence of 3 Chantry healers was more than enough to frighten more decent folk in deciding to wait and see if they got better on their own. Aside from a few drunken beggars snoring in the beds, the clinic was quiet. The healer didn't ask his name and tended to the wound with only a disapproving frown. In a few breaths, his arm was as good as ever. Pity magic wouldn't mend his coat sleeve. As he walked through the nave towards the exit, he heard a voice. "Guardsman, I was just about to look for you." The deep black gown she wore only made her eyes more otherworldly. A scent like lilacs filled the air around her. She may have been dressed in mourning garb, but she was dressed to kill. Donnan bowed. "Lady Mariel." "We should talk. I may have a lead for you." Chapter 11. The Café d'Or perched atop a hill on the Orlesian district of Hightown, with a view of the entire city so the wealthy patrons could keep an eye on the peasants toiling below. Lady Mariel studied the room across the rim of her cup. A few nobles sat at the delicate little tables, sipping tea from Ravane and whispering amongst themselves about the latest maneuvers in the grand game 1,000 leagues away. "What's this lead you have for me?" Donnan broke the silence, acutely aware that he stank of sweat and fish from the docks and was wearing a ripped, blood-stained coat in the most high-class cafe in Kirkwall. "We're being followed, guardsman." The lady's voice was low. From the tone, she might have been discussing the weather. "The 2 gentlemen in the corner by the door." Donnan picked up his teacup and gestured with it as if making a point while he turned slightly in his chair to look. The men were finely dressed, but almost out of place as he was, a large, sickly pale Ander with a face full of scars and a tattoo chastened with a stone dagger at his belt. "A chastened in a doublet? That's one for the history books," Donnan murmured. Lady Mariel favored him with a half-smile. "Last night a man came by the estate. He said he wanted to buy Seamus's collection. All of it." Donnan sat up straighter. "The swords?" "He said his name was Wagner." She sipped delicately at her tea. "He gave me an address in Lowtown in case I changed my mind. Those 2 have been shadowing me ever since." Chapter 12. They say you can buy anything in the Lowtown Bazaar. It's mostly true. On the right day, you can find vendors hawking spices from Saharan, the legacies of unknown dwarven paragons, maps to hidden fortresses in the Donarchs, and the crown jewels of Antiva. And no bookstore in Thetis peddles more wild stories than Lowtown. Don and Brennikovic made a point of greeting each shopkeeper as he passed so that the continual chant of guardsmen reached the ears of the two large men shadowing him since he'd left Lady Marielle in Hightown. The address she'd given him led to a warehouse in the Foundry District, a section of the city populated only by rusted metal spikes and vagrants. Donnan knocked on the door. An immaculately dressed butler greeted him and gestured for him to enter. "Guardsman Brennikovic, Monsieur Wagner has been expecting you." Donnan followed him through a labyrinth of warehouse offices to a back room richly appointed with silk carpets and tapestries depicting the execution of Andraste. Two heavy armchairs upholstered in velvet occupied the center of the room. In one sat a smug, red-haired man dressed entirely in blinding white samite. The other chair was empty. "Guardsman, please sit." The gentleman spoke with a heavy Starkhaven accent. "I suppose you would be Monsieur Wagner?" Donnan asked. "I am a procurer of antiquities, Sarah Brennikovic, as I'm sure the Lady Dunwall explained." Wagner carefully lit a pipe made of carved bloodstone and inhaled. "But we are both men of business, Guardsman. You are soon to retire, are you no? Allow me to present you with an opportunity." Donnan turned a critical eye on the tapestry of Andraste's pyre. "I'm listening." Wagner watched him through a growing veil of smoke. "Do you know what Seamus Dunwall had in his possession, Guardsman? What made the poor man worth killing?" "Do tell." "The sword of Hussarian." Wagner leaned forward, studying him closely. "The very blade that pierced Andraste's heart." Donnan gave him a flat stare. "If I believed that were even possible, I'd think that the blade would be worth a lot of coin." "Most would look at it and see a rusted piece of scrap, but it is no longer the jeweled blade of an Archon. But to the right buyer, Guardsman, the sword is worth an empire's ransom. I know such buyers." Wagner smiled. "It is here, in Kirkwall, and if you help me find it, I can make you a very rich man." Chapter 13. In the Lowtown Bazaar, Donnan paused to pay a little elven girl to pay courier for him before making the long climb back uphill to Hightown. A careful glance told him that the Scarface Ander and the tattooed Chastened were still tailing him. Donnan was certain they'd love the Viscount's keep. He passed beneath the stone gaze of the Coromant statues, flanking the gates, and nodded to the guards on his way to the barracks. No one noticed his ragged, bloody clothing, which disappointed him as much as he benefited from it. Recruits these days, always slacking off. Donnan passed by the captain's office and went looking for Jevlin. By now the kid ought to be rested up, and Donnan suspected he would need backup if his large, suspicious shadows decided to pick a fight. But Jevlin's bunk was empty. Donnan noted blood splatter on the bedding and a scent like lilacs. All of his gear was missing. In the center of the bunk was a note. "Bring the blade to the keys tonight at midnight, or the boy dies." It was signed with a wax seal, 6 crossed swords. Chapter 14. The late Magistrate Dunwald's butler blinked as Donnan and Brennikovic barged into the foyer. "Get Lady Marielle, now!" He headed straight to the parlor where the magistrate's collection was displayed. Wrapped in a black shawl, Marielle sauntered into the room and leaned against one of the glass cases. "Guardsman, what a pleasant surprise." "Where's Jevlin?" Her smile faltered. "Why do you think I would know? He's your partner." Donnan held up the note. "Your perfume, Lady Marielle." He dropped it on the display case beside her. "What were you doing in the guards' barracks?" "I didn't leave the note," she said with a measured calm. "And I don't have your partner." "But you were in the barracks." He stepped away to examine a display. "You told me Wagner wanted to buy the magistrate's entire collection, but he said he was only interested in one blade." He opened the case. "And I think it was never in Seamus's collection. I think it was the sword meant to go right here." He pointed to the empty, velvet-lined box. "I looked in the Viscount's records, and you've only been married to Magistrate Dunwald for about 3 weeks. You tell me who you're working for and where my partner is, and I'll see if we can't get you a deal with the Viscount's office." The chantry. Marielle closed the door quietly. "They sent me to Kirkwall a few months ago when rumors of the sword began to surface." She examined the note. "I don't have Jevlin. This was already on his bunk when I went to find both of you." Donnan didn't hide his skepticism. "You're innocent, but you didn't report him missing to any of the guards." "Someone took him from the barracks, Sirrah, with no one the wiser. That doesn't seem strange to you?" She looked him in the eye. "Have you ever heard of the Executors?" "They're a myth." "A myth that kills," she sighed. "The Executors have your partner, and I think they have someone inside the city guard. How else could they have gotten Jevlin out of the keep without being seen? Donnan watched her fidget with her shawl.
Why were you in the barracks?
I suspected the executors had an inside man, she shrugged. How else could they have gotten poor Comte de Favre to open the door to his killer? Since he arranged the sword's purchase for Seamus, he'd been hiding in his own home. The only people he's seen were Seamus and you. Chapter 15. The nobles of Hightown like to imagine that petty crime can only happen in the dank shadows of Darktown or maybe the crooked alleyways of Lowtown between the alienage and the poorest neighborhoods. Their lofty, ivy-walled avenues could never be the site of something as crude as a mugging or a simple assault. Donnan didn't have much trouble finding an out-of-the-way alcove near the chantry to wait for the scarred Ander and the tattooed Chasen to catch up with him. The Ander came at him first, dropping down from the balcony above his head. While Donnan tried to back out of his reach, the Chasen loomed behind him, clamping an enormous vice-like hand on his shoulder. The Ander's follow-up punch just below his ribs knocked the air from his lungs. As the Chasen lifted him up by his coat, Donnan got back enough of his breath to say,
You work for Wagner? I need to give him a message.
This earned him a skeptical look from the Ander, but the Chasen set his feet back on the ground.
Tell him I have his sword. He can meet me in the Keys at midnight to settle on the price.
For a long, nervous moment, Donnan watched a variety of expressions pass over the Ander's scarred, grayish face before the man nodded. Another long moment, and both Ander and Chasen walk away, leaving him alone in the alcove. With the sun just setting, there was only one place left that Donnan needed to go. The tavern in the center of Lowtown sat in its own tiny moat of spilled ale, vomit, and the seawater the owner flung at the walls in a half-hearted attempt to scour the seagull crap from the building. Donnan, like nearly every guardsman who drank at the Hangman, walked to the door to a frantic chorus of, Put it away! Hurry! He tried not to smile and completely succeeded when the brooding, white-haired elven bartender greeted him with a murderous glower.
Guardsman?
Donnan placed a handful of copper coins on the bar.
Keep the ale coming, Ferris. I've got some time to kill.
Chapter 16. Donnan left the tavern and headed out through a moonless night. Fog clung to the streets and buildings like cobwebs, and the heavy air threatened rain. Any other night, he would have gone straight to the barracks, but he had appointments to keep. The Keys at midnight exchanged the cacophony of swearing sailors for the mournful sound of distant bells in the harbor. Donnan found Wagner and his two thugs waiting just out of sight of the harbormaster's office. In the fog, Wagner's white samite coat made him gleam like a smug moon. Monsieur Brennakovic, I trust you bought my merchandise, Wagner smiled. Beside him, the tattooed Chasen cleaned what might have been blood from his nails with his dagger. Donnan reached into his coat and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle.
We should discuss a few things first.
Wagner's eyes gleamed in the reflected light of his paunch. The price, of course, he gestured to the scarred Ander, who held up a bag of coins. 100 crowns should suffice, yes?
That depends.
Donnan toyed with the twine securing the bundle's wrapping.
You killed Magistrate Dunwald, didn't you? After my run-in with your friends here, I realized the only blade that could have made that kind of stab wound was your Chasen stone knife.
Wagner shrugged. Men die all the time, Sirrah. We should not let that unpleasantness get in the way of business. Another gesture, and the Ander strode forward to stand just inches away from Donnan, brandishing the bag of gold like a flail.
And Jevlin?
Donnan asked. I know nothing of your partner's fate. Donnan handed over the bundle, and the Ander dropped the bag at his feet to deliver the prize to his boss. Wagner eagerly unwrapped the bundle, revealing an ancient, rusty, and pitted short sword. He frowned. This is not the blade. Both Chasen and Ander drew their daggers. Donnan held his ground.
Pity you killed Dunwald for it, then.
You'd think I'd kill a magistrate and not a guardsman, Wagner laughed.
Unwise, Sirrah.
That's all we need to hear. Captain Hendalen stepped around the corner behind Donnan, a dozen guards with her. For the first time in months, he saw what might have been a smile on her face. Good work, guardsmen. We'll take it from here. Chapter 17. Donnan left it to his captain and a dozen of Kirkwall's finest to drag Wagner and his thugs to the stocks. The heavy air gave up and turned into sheets of rain. The ancient gray stone stairs leading up to Lowtown turned into a waterfall. Donnan slogged up the narrow passage, boots squelching with every step. He almost didn't hear the ambush coming. As he reached the top of the stairs, a faint rasp of steel made him throw himself aside into a vegetable seller's table. A sword swung through the air where he had been and chimed against the rock wall. Donnan fumbled at his scabbard and just managed to catch the second blow with his sword. He had one moment as they locked blades to recognize his attacker. The younger man had shed his guard uniform for dark leathers, and his left arm now ended in a bandaged stump, but there was no mistaking him.
Jevlin?
Where is the blade of Hysarion? Jevlin recovered from the parry blow to slash at Donan's legs. He dodged back, slipping and nearly stumbling ass first down the stairs.
It was you, the inside man. You're the one who killed Defarve.
Donan lunged at the recruit. Jevlin quickly moved to block, but Donan's blade sliced his arm, drawing blood. Give me the sword! I know the pirate hag gave it to you! Jevlin swung a series of hard slashes, trying to break Donan's guard or knock him down the stairs. In the darkness and the driving rain, the guardsman struggled to see his attacker. Still, Donan grinned.
You left it at the key. I guess you ran off without it when the lady took your hand off. Not my fault you picked a fight you couldn't win.
He tried to edge away from the stairs, but the rookie kept him pinned between the vegetable stall and a fall to his death. Jevlin lunged, his blade punching through Donan's armor just below his ribs, but the recruit slipped on the wet stone during his attack and stumbled into his enemy. Donan shoved him away and over the stairs. His fall ended with a sickening crack of broken bones. Donan drew a ragged breath and pulled Jevlin's sword from his side, trying not to slip on his own blood. The chantry was a long way off. Chapter 18. The rain stopped with a suddenness that suggested that some enterprising footpad from the coterie had climbed up to shank the clouds. The fog drifted off to haunt a better part of the wounded coast, and as Donan reached the chantry courtyard, the clouds parted to let a sliver of moonlight shine on the rain-swept flagstones. He stopped to catch his breath and tighten the torn-off coat sleeve he used as a bandage. The bleeding was slowing, which meant either the wound at his side wasn't that deep or he was running out of blood to lose. Trying not to dwell on the latter, he pushed open the chantry doors. At this maker-forsaken hour, the chantry was lit only by the eternal flame at Andraste's feet. A single soul occupied the space, lighting a candle for the dead. She rose as Donan staggered into the firelight.
Guardsman!
Lady Mariel rushed to help him into one of the pews.
Might want to wake up one of the healers.
He managed a pained smile.
I wasn't sure you'd be here.
Neither was I. Your message was a little vague. Mariel tried to examine his makeshift bandage, but Donan waved her away. He pointed towards the golden statue of Andraste.
I had a friend deliver something for you, under the altar.
Mariel cast him a skeptical look, but she climbed the dais and returned with a small oilcloth bundle. She picked apart the wrapping's knot and peered down at the rusty blade inside, specks of dried blood still clinging to the pitted guard. The sword of Hysarion, she breathed, almost a prayer.
You can get it to the divine?
Donan asked. She wiped out her eyes. I'll take it to her myself. What do you want in return? Donan struggled to his feet.
Just put in a good word for me with the Maker, your ladyship. You never know when I might need it.
And he walked away, leaving her standing in the firelight with history in her hands. Chapter by Vir Dirthara. Donan wiped spilled ale off the bar, listening to the cries of the birds and the crashing of waves outside. Another slow day on the Amaranthine coast. The tavern didn't get many visitors, just a little too far south of the Antiman border to catch the caravans, but he hadn't opened it to make a profit. He poured a glass of plum brandy from a chipped decanter and carried it out to the patio, where an impressive Orlean mustache was keeping company with an old gray warden playing a minuet on a lute. Donan handed the brandy to the warden, in some deference to his mustache, and the gentleman accepted it with grace, placing the glass on the table before finishing the last measure of his song. You'll have my thanks, guardsman. The Orlean set the lute on a nearby chair and allowed the brandy to approach his mustache. The mustache did not appear impressed with the vintage.
It's just dawning these days,
he replied, looking out over the waves.
My time in the Kirkwall Guard is over.
I spent so many years around the city of chains, the warden sighed. We're both lucky to have escaped their clutches. The sun was setting behind them, drawing long shadows on the ground that stretched towards the sea.
Maybe,
Donan shrugged, watching the waves turn dark in the distance.
Some days, I'm not sure all of me made it out.
To what we've left behind. The Orlean raised his glass in a toast, and the two men watched the light fade over the ocean in peace. He poured a glass of smoky Ferelden whiskey and carried it out to the patio where a sandy-haired fellow was attempting to play the lute. Or murder the lute. Or murder the concept of music itself. It probably didn't help that the man was holding the lute straight out in front of him as if he feared it were a snake that might bite him. Donnan offered the fellow the glass, fervently hoping he would make the playing stop. "Guardsman, you came to my rescue just in time." The blond man took the glass with a sheepish laugh and all but threw the lute into a nearby chair.
"It's just dawning these days,"
he replied, looking out over the waves.
"My time in the Kirkwall Guard is over."
Retirement is grand, isn't it? No more responsibility, no more senior officers yelling at you, no more Kirkwall. The other man looked wistfully out at the birds diving into the waves down the coast. The sun was setting behind them, turning the amaranthine ocean a deep sapphire and sending the seabirds back up the cliffs to their nests.
"Kirkwall's still out there, along with all those other things. I just didn't bring them to the bar."
Donnan grinned.
"So, what did you retire from?"
"You wouldn't believe me if I told you." The man gave him a lopsided grin in return. "You want to hear a badly told story about a bastard prince with an unholy love for cheese?"
"Why not? We've got time."
And while the blond man spun his unlikely tale, the two of them watched the last of the light vanish in peace. He poured the last dregs of pale Ferelden lager into a mug and headed out to the patio where an old soldier sat strumming a particularly battered-looking lute. Donnan held out the mug like a peace offering. "Thank you, Guardsman." The soldier set aside the lute in favor of the mug with a businesslike efficiency. The grizzled Mabari curled up at his feet, flicked one ear, dreaming.
"It's just dawning these days,"
he replied, looking out over the waves.
"My time in the Kirkwall Guard is over."
"Is it?" The soldier sighed, looking down at the sleeping dog.
"If you don't still wake up from dreams about patrols, you're luckier than most."
The sun slipped down another notch in the sky behind them, and the wind coming in off the sea turned cooler.
"You know what I miss?" Donnan said. "The smell of the Lowtown Bazaar in the morning. 24 bakeries with loaves of bread and sweet pies in the oven."
"There are worse things," the soldier laughed.
"To remember about home and the smell of pies baking."
Then he sighed again.
"You really are luckier than most."
Donnan smiled.
"Maybe so."
The old soldier raised his mug.
"Here's to home."
At his feet, the hound twitched her paws, chasing rabbits in her sleep, and the last light faded from the sky in peace. He poured some noxious Ander stout from an oak cask into a heavy tankard and carried it outside to a dark-haired nobleman on the patio, idly strumming a lute so out of tune it sounded like some other instrument, perhaps a tuba or a kettle drum, trying to invent music from scratch. Donnan handed over the tankard, only half hoping it would stop him from playing any more.
"That's very kind of you, Guardsman."
Thankfully, the gentleman set aside his lute and took the tankard, putting his feet up on the table in front of him.
"It's just dawning these days,"
he replied, looking out over the waves.
"My time in the Kirkwall Guard is over."
"It's never really gone," the nobleman smiled. "Kirkwall, it finds its way into your soul, and once it gets there, you carry it always." The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows from the tavern down to the water. A flock of cormorants took advantage of the fading light to dive for fish, making their way back out to sea.
"Maybe so."
Donnan smiled, too.
"But the world can always use a champion or a guardsman wherever they happen to go."
The gentleman raised his tankard. "I'll drink to that." And the two men watched the last of the light disappear in peace. He poured a glass of red Orlesian wine and carried it out to the patio where Lady Marielle sat, playing a lute for the benefit of a distant flock of cormorants and a sleepy Mabari hound. Donnan handed her the glass with a smile.
"Can I get you anything else, your ladyship?"
"That's very kind of you, Guardsman." Marielle set aside her lute. The sleepy hound looked up, annoyed at having its lullaby interrupted.
"It's just dawning these days,"
he replied, looking out over the waves.
"My time in the Kirkwall Guard is over."
"Is it?" She smiled slyly over the glass. "You don't think naming a tavern the Watch was a sign that perhaps you can take the guardsman out of Kirkwall and even out of the guard, but he never quite leaves?" The sun was setting behind them. The hound stretched and ambled over to the table to lay his head on Lady Marielle's knee and beg for table scraps. In the distance, the cormorants took off in a single motion to return to their roosts up the shore. Donnan smiled back.
"Maybe you're right. but tonight I'm off duty, your ladyship.
Marielle, she corrected. And to answer your question, you can get me some company. 1 guardsman might suffice. And the 2 of them watched the last of the light disappear together in peace.